Hey, how's it going? I'm Liam Griffin, and welcome to the No Pulp podcast. Now, today, it's just me. No one else, just me for 45 minutes talking sports. Nah. April Fools, to my left, I have the legendary Will Shea and Matt Fairfax. Guys, did I miss the memo or something? I mean, you guys looking all dapper in these sunglasses. You just have me feeling a little out of the loop.
It's your loss, man. You should have coordinated with us.
All I'm going to say is I just want to know if it was half off or buy one, get one free when you got that shirt, because that is just something you're wearing right now.
It is something.
I mean, Fairfax and I are also the only two wearing Hawaiian, so Will, you didn't get that memo either, my friend.
I'm not from the islands. Can't claim to be.
I'm also not from the islands.
You're appropriating them then.
Okay, well, enough talk about fashion. We've got a lot of basketball to discuss. If you haven't heard, the Final Four, it's this weekend, and we begin on the women's side talking about South Carolina. The Gamecocks steamrolled their way, including a historical domination of Howard in the round of 64. Will, what are your thoughts on the Gamecocks?
I really like South Carolina Gamecocks. I think they are fantastic. They have this mantra that they've been saying all season, which is unfinished business, something we're very familiar with. But I think they're taking this to heart. They lost in the national championship last year, or the Final Four, I can't remember. But they've just steamrolled every team they've come across, and they do it in such a dominating way, not with their offense, but with their defense. They're so strong defensively that it doesn't matter if they show up on offense. They just suffocate teams with their athleticism, their length, their strength. I love watching this team play.
I have to agree with you to a certain extent. I am a believer in the South Carolina Gamecocks. I'm not as sold as you are. I think they're, feeling the pressure right now, losing in the SEC championship game, the SEC tournament this year. I think they no longer feel the aura of invincibility in these big games. They know that they are beatable. They know what it's like to come up short. I think losing in the Final Four last season, playing most of this season as an overall number one seed, I believe they're feeling the pressure. I think, I don't want to get too far ahead of the show. I think they could slip up, but we know that they have one player in Aaliyah Boston who has just been carrying pretty much all season.
Yeah, building off what you guys have said, Aaliyah Boston averaging 17 points per game and 12 rebounds per game. Look, if she's not the player of the year on the women's side, with Paige Beckers getting hurt and Caitlin Clark getting bounced early from the women's tournament, I don't know what to tell you. And then you mentioned, Will, them coming up short last year. They lost a 66-65 heartbreaker to Stanford. So they've been there.
Who was the national champion?
Exactly.
Too. It should be mentioned. They were the best team in the country.
And they played them down to the wire. Now, I will say this, though. It hasn't exactly been a difficult road. I mean, the highest seed they played was 5-seeded North Carolina. And I know that's a factor of Iowa losing to Creighton, who South Carolina ended up spanking in the Elite Eight. But it's still troublesome as we have the bracket up here. They take down Miami and North Carolina. By the way, that Howard score, 79-21 was the final score of that game. A 58-point demolition.
Yeah, which we know too. That was a 48-point spread, and they still covered it, which was incredibly impressive. But I don't buy too much of the stock that they've had an easy road. Yeah, they've had to play a 5 seed as their best seed, but you play who's in front of you. And I, like everyone else, would have loved to see the 1 and 2 South Carolina and Iowa, see Caitlin Clark play them. But regardless, this team was the favorite coming in. They're still the favorite now. I don't see any reason why they wouldn't keep going other than who they're going to play in the next round. I think we're going to tease that a little bit.
Yeah.
It's a really good matchup. And I still think South Carolina should be the favorite and has a lot more talent than the team they're playing, which is the Louisville Cardinals, which we'll talk about in a little bit.
Spoiler alert.
Well, we'll talk about them, but I don't put any merit behind the fact that they haven't played anyone. I think that's not factual at all.
I think Will Shea's bang on with this one. I don't think you can penalize a team for who they played. And the harsh reality is when you're a number one overall seed, people aren't going to say you're a fraud or you've had a fraudulent path to the Final Four or whatever because you're the number one overall seed in the tournament. You feel like you can, just go up against anyone. I would like to go back to Aaliyah Boston. Came out today, Naismith Player of the Year, AP Player of the Year. Fully deserved, repping those U.S. Virgin Islands, almost 17 points a game, shooting an impressive 77% from the free throw line, too.
It's more than impressive. That's pretty, that's Brittany Griner territory.
Yeah, I'd probably shoot about 20 to 30% from the free throw line myself, so big credit to her. I also like the play from Destiny Henderson as well, leading the team in assists, steals, and minutes, really kind of just showcasing that they can attack you in multiple different ways.
I got one more name for you on South Carolina. It's a name we in the 315 know very well. Camila Cardoso. Hasn't really been getting the spotlight because of Aaliyah Boston, but we love to see former Orange players doing well. And speaking of former Orange players, Emily Engsler and the Louisville Cardinals were in a bad spot after the ACC tournament. I mean, they got flattened by, frankly, a worse Miami Hurricanes team that lost to South Carolina. But they end up coming into the tournament, steamrolling the competition, getting into the Final Four. They will face South Carolina on Friday.
I don't want to, once again, move too far ahead in the program, but I am all in on these Louisville Cardinals.
All in?
All in.
Yeah.
I love them. I love their staff. I love the way they play. Haley Van Lith, I can't say enough good things about her. Absolute baller. I may be biased because I'm a lefty in basketball. I enjoy a nice, pretty left-handed jump shot, but just the ability to create her own shot so many times throughout a game. I also wanted to mention, I think a lot of people know about this, her incredible relationship that she had with Kobe Bryant. Kobe was one of her mentors. Kobe also wanted Van Lith to work with one of his daughters. Van Lith has been fantastic. I think Chelsea Hall played a really good game in the Elite Eight as well. Launching threes without consciousness, but also hitting them really impressed me. And most importantly, this team plays quick, this team plays with passion, and this team really relies on shooting, which can be dangerous at times, but if they hit shots, they can compete with anyone.
Yeah, to quote what you said, I think you hit the nail on this one. I really love this Louisville team, and I still, for some reason, think people are underrating them, and I don't know why. I get they lost to Miami in a very bad loss, but this team is good. This team is really, really good. And if this was any other team South Carolina was facing, I think I'd almost certainly pick South Carolina to steamroll. I really like this Louisville team. I love their shooting. I love their ability to create from the outside. It's going to give that athleticism that I talked about with South Carolina some problems, because when you can stretch the floor and you can create off the dribble like Haley Van Lith and those extra players can, it's really hard to use your physical strength and your physical, advantages against them. When they're launching unconsciously from three, it's not going to matter when you're dominating the paint. In fact, it stretches out your defense to the point where Aaliyah Boston's almost neutralized inside, because you can pull her out of the paint, you can pull her out of her comfort zone. And I think that's where Louisville is going to be so good in this game. I think if Haley Van Lith can keep up her amazing play in this tournament, this is the one team South Carolina should not want to face.
Yeah, you mentioned Haley Van Lith, Will. She has been on an absolute tear. She scored 20-plus in all 4 tournament games. And when you look at Louisville's path, it's kind of unorthodox where since the first round against UAlbany, they steamrolled that game, win it by 32. But other than that, all 3 games have been decided by 12 points or less, but all of them have been decided by 9 points or more. So it's not really blowout territory, and it's also not really the point where it's so tight of a game. And I think that's an underrated skill that a lot of teams sort of overlook. And you mentioned Haley Van Lith's relationship with Kobe Bryant. How about the players' relationship with Jeff Walls? We saw Emily Engsler in a press conference get emotional talking about it. And, the Louisville head coach, 0-2 in national title games. This is about as golden an opportunity as he's going to get to finally get the Cardinals over the hump.
Yeah.
I think it's a golden opportunity, and I think going back to why I'm so in on this Louisville team, they just play with so much passion. Not that celebrating, a Final Four is how you want to end your season, losing in the Final Four, but as soon as that game ended against Michigan, you could just see on the faces the reaction. They really putting everything, playing with everything for their coach. One other thing, too, the nameplate on the bottom of the jersey, so underrated. More teams should be doing that to stick them out, because it's kind of basic just having the last name on the back of the jersey. But like you said, they're really playing it for Coach Walls. I really like Kiana Smith kind of facilitating the team, really passing players open, recording those assists for this team.
And there you have it. That's the first matchup of the Final Four. South Carolina versus Louisville at 7 p.m. Friday night. Gamecocks versus Cardinals. But what about the other 2 teams left, right? And what better way to get into the second matchup than by talking about the reigning national champion, Stanford Cardinal. They brought 12 players back from last year's national title team. Their only 3 losses are to ranked teams, and they're undefeated since the calendar turned to 2022. This team is playing its best basketball at the most opportune time.
They really are. They're getting hot at the right time. And I think it does say something, though, that they brought back 12 players, as you said, and they're playing this well, and we're still not considering them the best team in this tournament. They may not even be the second best team in this tournament. I think there's an argument that Louisville or South Carolina or UConn, any of those teams, could be better than this Stanford team. But when it comes down to it, this team lives and dies by Cameron Brink, in my opinion. I think she's so vitally important to this team because she's such a difference maker on the defensive end. Regardless of what she can do on offense, there's so much offense to be spread around on this team that they can just do whatever they want on that end. When you have someone like that that's so dominant inside and can prevent teams, can shut down the paint, can prevent driving lanes from ever opening up, and can communicate with her team the way she can, I think that's where this game flips on its head entirely.
Yeah, going back to what Will just said, Brink has been fantastic. Lexi Hall is really a player that caught my eye in the Elite Eight matchup, putting up 20 points against Texas with the game on the line. But one thing I think we need to do more in college sports in general is respect the champions. We touched on it earlier. Until they are knocked off, I'm going to keep rolling with Stanford because I know they can climb the mountain. I know they can get there. They don't have anything to prove to me. And to me, it's blasphemous that we're not talking about Stanford as one of these, oh, they're the favorites. Like, they're the national champs. I feel like they should be the favorites. I don't know why we're continuing to put other teams above them.
And they beat a really good Texas team to get here too. People were like, Texas is not a slump of a team. Like, that was a really good game. Stanford outplayed them entirely. So I think they, like you said, they don't have anything to prove. But I just think the perspective of them is that they won, and now there's teams that are going to take their mantle at this point.
Well, first of all, talking about that Stanford-Texas game, horns down.
Horns down.
And you mentioned that Stanford sort of steamrolled their way. I disagree. I mean, you can say the final score is deceptive, but the final score of that game was 59-50. Yes, Stanford outplayed them, but I wouldn't say it was a full-threaded domination. But the fact that they can win those types of games is only a skill that's going to help them out down the line. Now, Tara Vanderveer, she absolutely has a case to be made for the greatest college coach of all time in men's and women's basketball. Easily top 3. There's no debating that. Now, talking about this year's Cardinals team, you mentioned Cameron Brink. She had a 20-20 game against Indiana. She wasn't feasting on turkey back on Thanksgiving. She was feasting on the Hoosiers. And she's not the only double-double threat. Haley Jones, the 6'1 guard, 2 6-footers with double figures in double-doubles. Brink with 13, Jones with 11. One of those players on the women's side is lethal. You bring in 2, that size is going to overwhelm, because Will spoiled it earlier, the UConn Huskies.
Well, I think what's more important too is you mentioned that she's a guard as well. And the fact that she can dribble the ball and has that ability and that talent to complement Brink, like, that's such a dynamic duo that's hard to beat. And it makes Stanford one of the most unbeatable teams in the country. We'll talk about UConn a little bit, I think. But I'm so impressed by this team every time I watch them. And the coaching is bar none. She's currently, I think, the best coach in college basketball for men's or women's. I don't think the best ever. I think there are some arguments, Gino Auriemma might still have that claim. John Wooden might have that claim. But I think, unquestionably, I think she's top 3 ever.
Yeah, just reiterating what we said, I still just don't understand why people are not rating them so good. They're returning most of their roster. They
12
have
players.
12 players.
One of the best coaches that we've potentially ever seen in the sport. And like you said, when you have 3 players, someone can have an off night, can shoot terribly, and the team can still win comfortably. So I think like you guys said, they just complement each other so well. If Hall's off, then Jones can pick up the slack. If Jones has a bad game, then Brink can shoot the lights out. And they can really just kind of support each other, and I think it's going to be a fantastic Final Four matchup against those Huskies.
Yeah, you mentioned UConn, and their season has been nothing short of fascinating to dissect, in large part because Paige Beckers went down in December, and truth be told, it looked dire. To quote the great Steven Sklar, their loss against Georgia Tech was what we call in the business a major doop-to-do. But, they didn't have Paige. They're undefeated since the Huskies' best player has come back.
Yeah, you want to take this start?
Yeah,
Go for it.
I first want to just talk about this Elite Eight game, by the way.
Oh my God!
Yes.
Yes.
I know we can talk about the season, but I've just been dying to talk about this game all week.
Maybe the best college basketball game all year. I think it's up there. Yeah. Maybe I think it is. Honestly, it was so much fun
I can't think of anything that would top it.
No, I can't either.
So I know we want to talk about the team, but we got to talk about this game because it's just on my mind right away. Arguably one of the best basketball games I've ever seen. Yep. I think, even though I'm not exactly the most hardcore UConn fan myself, I was thrilled to see Paige Beckers come back to action so early from her injury. I think reality is that she's transcended the sport of women's basketball, because there's some people who maybe don't watch a ton of women's basketball, but they know Paige, they know her story, they know what she's capable of. And I think one thing that we're probably going to touch on in a sec, we do have to make clear, is that this team is more than Paige Beckers.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. It's more than Paige Bueckers, but I do think this team starts and stops with Paige Bueckers.
Yeah.
She's an engine that we haven't seen in college basketball in quite a while. Like, I was talking about this with a couple friends the other day, but there's no face of men's college basketball right now, I would say. There's, Paulo, Jabari Smith, Chet Holmgren, they're all really good, but there's no face, I would say. Paige Bueckers is the face of basketball in general that is not professional. Any collegiate basketball, she is the face. And she's well deserving of that.
Absolutely.
She's one of the most talented players I've ever seen. She's got the personality. She's got that star charisma that exudes someone of that level. And I find myself watching her and just being like, you can do what, I can't count you out. It doesn't matter who they're playing. And we'll talk about this Stanford matchup, but I can't count her out, regardless of who they are playing. She is that talented that she can win games on her own, and not just by scoring. She's not, solo-minded. She's not, a score-first person. She is facilitating. She's a team player, and she's just so much fun and so good to watch. She's so great for the sport of college basketball.
Yeah, people have been talking about this being the most balanced Huskies team of all time, and there are stats behind it. They have 8 players averaging at least 7 points per game, including 4 in double figures, and you can talk about Paige's greatness all you want. I mean, she had 27 in the game against North Carolina State. But it speaks volumes that they have that many players that can produce at such a high level. Now, 14 straight Final Fours.
It's unreal.
I don't know if we have ever seen a run like this in all of sports, and I don't know if we will ever see a run like it again. I mean, you can look back to the 60s Celtics, but there were 8 teams in the National Basketball Association back then. What they are doing now, especially with player empowerment in the transfer portal starting to really come into fruition, it's unprecedented. And you can love or hate UConn all you want, but you have to admire just how impressive what they've been able to do, what Gino Auriemma has been able to do is.
Yeah.
I think I was having a conversation with someone about this earlier today. Coach Gino needs to be in the conversation for greatest college coach of all time in any sports. Because we often like to talk about men's college basketball, Coach K, what he's been able to achieve with the Duke Blue Devils. We talk about Coach Nick Saban in Alabama. Have they been a consistent model of success? But 14 straight Final Fours, not 12, not 13, 14 straight Final Fours is beyond comprehensible. Saban and Coach K have been dominant, but they can't eat at the same dinner table as Gino right now.
No way.
14 straight Final Fours. They've been one of the best 4 teams in the country for 14 years in a row. Might not ever happen again, but I just think we need to put a little more respect on Coach Gino, even though he's probably one of the most respected coaches we've seen in college basketball.
Yeah, I agree. And that's why, when we talk about Vanderveer, she's, I think, number 3 because you look at what Gino's done, and it's so unprecedented. The only person who stacks up to her is John Wooden. And that's because in the 60s and 70s, 11 championships in 13 years. It was a different sport back then. It was the 60s. It wasn't as competitive. It wasn't as athletic. It's so much different. No one and done. You had Kareem Abdul-Jabbar for Lou Alcindor at the time for 4 years. You don't get that anymore. But in the women's side of the game, you kind of do because you get people like Paige Bueckers, like Maya Moore, like Diana Taurasi, like Brianna Stewart, who stay for 4 years and create these dynasties. And again, I get the love and hate. You don't want to root for Goliath all the time. You don't want to root for Alabama. But you have to respect what's happened. And Gino has cemented himself as probably the greatest coach in college history.
And you mentioned all those players. I think that's one of the things that separates the women from the men and makes it perhaps even a little more appealing because you get to know these players a little more over time. It's not like the men where you've got your Paolo Bancheros and your Jabari Smiths. Just flip the peace sign like Tyreek Hill and get out of there very quickly. I know you like that, given that he's now a member of your Miami Dolphins.
Good luck, yeah.
Yeah, but real quickly before we get into predictions, just overall, South Carolina, Louisville, UConn, and Stanford, what does this Final Four say about the balance of power on the women's side?
I think it says a lot. I think it says a lot about the parity, that there are 4 different conferences represented in the Final Four, which is great. I do think it's a little misleading, though. I think the power dynamics of the conferences are still way too lopsided, and I would love to see more parity within those. You look at the records of these teams, and they're all absolutely insane. It reminds me a lot of late 2000s, early 2010s men's college basketball. We had Kentucky, Kansas, Duke, and one other team that would pop up every so often. that was completely dominant, and the rest of the conferences were good, not great. And I think we're getting out of that realm now of women's college basketball where we'll have these dominant teams for a couple years, and then we'll get super parity. We'll get almost where we are now in men's basketball, where you have good teams, but outside of Gonzaga, who plays in the nothing conference, these teams at the top are very competitive all throughout the conferences.
Yeah, I would love to echo what Will Shea just said. Also wanted to touch on the ACC putting on a pretty solid performance in this tournament. Miami, North Carolina, Louisville, North Carolina State, Notre Dame, all winning at least one game in this tournament. Virginia Tech and Georgia Tech may have lost to Florida Gulf Coast and Kansas, but they're outliers in every statistical group. Math 221 at Syracuse University taught me that. As you guys know, I am a huge Pac-12 fan, but besides Stanford, Pac-12 didn't really show up in this tournament. Arizona, Utah only made it to the second round. Oregon, Colorado, and Washington State were all first-round exits. And I think this Final Four in particular has showcased that the Big Ten is a very solid conference, but they're just not there yet. Michigan lost to Louisville in the Elite Eight. Ohio State lost to Texas in the Sweet 16. Maryland lost to Stanford in the Sweet 16. Caitlin Clark and Iowa lost to Creighton.
That's the one I think really matters, though, because if Iowa makes it to this Final Four, I think we switch our perspective on the Big Ten a lot. Because she is arguably the second, third, fourth best player in the country, and they just got bounced too early. That's really all that happened. I think Iowa really was supposed to carry that Big Ten conference, and they just didn't do it this year.
You both make excellent points. However, the one thing that I've noticed about this Final Four is this. The more things change, the more things stay the same, because UConn, 14 straight Final Fours. Stanford, defending national champions. South Carolina and Louisville have been in and out of the Final Four for a long time. It's, like you said, the women's game is catching up to the men's game in the parity, but right now, it just goes to show just how good Don Staley, Jeff Walls, Tara Vanderveer, and Gino Auriemma are at their jobs.
Yeah, 100%. Coaching wins.
On top for a reason.
Yep.
So let's wrap up our women's talk. Who wins the Final Four games Friday? And then let's take it to Sunday. Who you got having one shining moment on Sunday?
Okay. What do you want? You want to go first? You want me to go first?
I'll go first because you're the senior on this show.
All right,
I want you to have your developing moment. So, I'm predicting a whole lot of red this weekend. I have Louisville over South Carolina in the first Final Four matchup. Van Lith is showing up, she's showing out, and she's proven a lot of people wrong this weekend. I have Stanford over UConn in the second Final Four. Yes, Liam, you're making that weird face, but your face will not be the same when I prove you right this weekend.
When you prove me right?
When I prove you wrong this weekend. You know, it's late, we're all fighting here. I have the Louisville Cardinals against the Stanford Cardinal in the championship game. We got the Cardinals.
Like birds or trees better?
I like them both, but as a guy who's always wanted to fly high in the sky, I'm rolling with the birds. But the Louisville Cardinals are cutting down the nets.
Wow.
They're hoisting that championship trophy, and they are repping for the ACC this weekend.
Can you balk because you picked Louisville?
Can I what?
Balk.
What does that mean?
Like a
chicken.
bird.
Oh, like a Bach? I thought you meant Colin Bach. Shout out to our producer, Colin Bach.
All right, well, I'm going to echo at least one of your picks, and I believe in Haley Van Lith. Yes. I really like Leah Boston, but something just tells me the birds are going to catch fire, and they're going to take down the #1 overall seed, and it's not going to be pretty for South Carolina. But on the other side, I don't believe in trees. I'm sorry, I just don't believe in them. They don't exist. So I'm going to go with the Huskies. I'm going to go with Paige Beckers because I just said I can never bet against Paige Beckers. And that means on that Sunday, I'm also taking Paige Beckers to win the Natty. I think this is the year. I think she's the best player in college basketball by a good margin at this point. And I think she's the Magic Johnson of this generation for women's college basketball. And Magic Johnson won with Michigan State. She's going to win with UConn.
You're wrong, but I'm sure Liam will be even wronger, if that's a word. So let's listen to what he has to say.
What you got?
Yeah, you're not going to like what I have to say, Matt. So I actually have South Carolina beating Louisville. I think the Cardinals bigs are going to have a hard time containing Aaliyah Boston.
How much are they? How much is South Carolina winning by?
3.
Wow, that's low. Okay.
Yeah, it's going to be a close game.
It's a close game. Okay.
And then I've got UConn beating Stanford for the reasons we'll mention. I think Paige Beckers is too good, too influential to go her college career without taking home a chip. And then in the championship game, I've got the UConn Huskies taking down the South Carolina Gamecocks.
Let's go.
Woo! For the Huskies.
Look, he's right. He's right, so you can't argue it.
I mean, they have been good, but there's just something different about this Louisville team. There's something different about Haley Van Lith. I really feel like she will go down as one of the all-time greats this tournament. She's going on a legendary run. That left-handed stroke could put up 30 in both games. I'm fully confident in my picks. You guys are going to be laughing at me, but when the Cardinals
we are going to be laughing at you.
Cardinal, I'm going to send some tweets to you. I'm going to send you some text messages, just crying, laughing face emojis.
Sure you will. Okay.
All right, well, that does it for our women's talk. Time to get into the men's side, and we begin with the Villanova Wildcats, who, to be frank, looked kind of shaky to start the season. Back-to-back 20-point losses to Baylor and Creighton in December. But this team leads the nation all-time, mind you, in free throw percentage. Best free throw shooting team in all college basketball history.
It's a very impressive stat. I don't know how much of a role it will play in the Final Four. If they want to get physical and attack the rim, then maybe it'll come down to a free throw shooting battle. Sure, it can help them late in games. It's an impressive stat, but just because they have the greatest free throw shooting percentage of all time, it doesn't do anything, in my opinion, to elevate them as favorites or even going all the way in this Final Four.
Yeah, I do think it means a lot if it's close late in the game, but I just don't see it being close late in the game. This Nova team, I don't think should be here. I know I said in the women's side that it doesn't matter who you play, you beat who's in front of you. That being said, I do think this Nova team has had a couple matchups that have not been as strong. Namely, avoiding Arizona was a huge win for them. Because Arizona, personally in my opinion, was the most talented team in this tournament, and they got bounced. I fully acknowledge that. But I think Arizona was a matchup nightmare for Villanova. Their athleticism, their size, their strength would have dominated Villanova, in my opinion.
Well, I thought Arizona was good too, but that faith was so misguided that I have to eat 10 Doritos Locos Tacos as a result of it.
Don't make bets.
But if you're sitting, I mean, yeah, Villanova didn't run into Arizona, but you know who they did run into?
Houston.
The Houston Cougars, who, by the way, if you didn't notice, beat the Arizona Wildcats in the Sweet 16.
Yeah.
But that being said, Justin Moore did go down in that Houston game, the team's second leading scorer, but fact of the matter is they've still got Colin Gillespie, probably the best point guard in all college basketball on the men's side, and Jermaine Samuels, the Franklin, Massachusetts native, 17.5 points per game in the tournament, and then 3 Final Fours in 6 tournaments for Jay Wright. They are probably the biggest modern blue blood out there.
Yeah, they're a new blood. I like that new term, new blood. Jay Wright's the best coach in men's college basketball, and it's not really even close at this point. Like, the old school of Coach K, Jim Boeheim, Izzo, all of them, they're really good. Jay Wright's just unparalleled at this point. He's so talented. He's so good at recruiting players that work within his system and getting the most out of them. But I still don't think it's going to matter for this time around. I just think the offense isn't there. Having no Justin Moore at this point is a heartbreaker because they don't score a lot as it is. They're going to need to play defense better than we've ever seen them play, and they've done it so far this tournament, but not against a team like Kansas. And we're going to talk about it, but that's the X factor here, is who they're playing.
Yeah, I'm definitely, as a human being, feeling for Justin Moore after watching that injury. I mean, I feel for all players who suffer season-ending injuries, but think about how hard these players work, taking training sessions during the off-season, sacrificing their personal time, waking up early for practice, all the travel miles they put in during the season, and to just suffer an injury that late in the season is really tragic, but did well to get his team as far as he did. Jermaine Samuels, you mentioned, 16 against Houston, 22 against Michigan. We've been carrying that kind of offensive load, even though they haven't been putting up a ton of points in their game. We talked about Colin, All-American, third team as a point guard. When you watch him play, one thing that I like is how much he posts up as a point guard. And we've seen a bunch of Villanova guards in the past, and I think Jay Wright touched on it earlier. We've seen Archie Diacono did it, Josh Hart did it, Jalen Brunson,
who's 6'0", still did it.
That was insane, just watching these small point guards just bat guys down, take them to the rim, and it was just really eye-opening in my opinion, because all these perimeter players they're playing, they're not used to guarding guys in the post, so I think that's another reason what makes Colin so good. As for Jay Wright, I have no discrepancies with Will Shea. I think he's the best coach in college basketball.
I'll give you one more, Dante DiVincenzo.
Yeah. For a bench player, though, before the championship game.
Yeah.
You forget that, which is crazy.
He came off the bench in that title game, too.
He did, and he played really, really well. I want to say something, too. Jay Wright's not just the best coach in college basketball right now. I think he's the best college basketball coach since Brad Stevens. And I don't think it's like Brad Stevens did something that was unparalleled, taking a team like Butler, which was not a basketball school. Nobody cared about Butler, and brought them to 2 national championships. Congratulations. No one then did. If you could name me another player other than Gordon Hayward on that team, that'd be
Shelvin Mack, Matt Howard.
There you go, Matt Howard. That's 3 of the starters right there. But Jay Wright, I just think, is on another level of coaching. And it shows when you look at this tournament and you see people who fall short time and time again, what Jay Wright's able to get out of his players and eke these runs out when they're not as talented as other teams is so impressive.
All right, moving on to the Kansas Jayhawks. This is the second time in 4 tournaments that the Wildcats and Jayhawks are taking on each other in the Final Four. Villanova steamrolled Kansas 95-79 back in 18. The main thing that concerns me is about the Jayhawks is that other than their Sweet 16 matchup, their road to the Final Four hasn't exactly been tough.
I mean, you can claim Kansas had an easy pass, but what you got to realize is March Madness brings out a different animal in some of these teams. In March Madness, I don't really think there is an easy path because every team plays like their life really depends on it. North Carolina, you could say, is the only team that played a 1 seed, considering Kansas is, a 1 seed itself. But that was against a depleted Baylor squad, so I'm not really here for these easy path comments. It's not like Kansas gets to choose its opponent. Auburn could have just beaten Miami, and then they could have met later in the tournament. Carolina, just as I was saying, North Carolina didn't get to choose to play the St. Peter's Peacocks in the Elite Eight. In March, you take what cards the dealer gives you, and you play out the hands. As my good friend Will Shea, there's no free cards in March.
Yeah, I do like that you finally admit that Providence wasn't a hard matchup, and they were just.
I said that was their only tough matchup in the tournament.
No, Providence wasn't hard either. They're frauds. We all know this. Shout out John Dales. No, I understand though. Kansas hasn't been very impressive. I think what's more defining is not just that they haven't played the best of the best teams, it's that they haven't shown out in those games that they've played. No. They haven't been dominant utterly. They haven't shown what a 1 seed really should be until the second half against Miami. And watching that game, that was peak Kansas. They steamrolled the Hurricanes. It wasn't even close. The Hurricanes did not belong on the same floor as Kansas at that point.
It was like 47 points in that second half.
Unreal. But it was not just that they outscored them. It was defensively they were suffocating. They were hitting shots. They were getting to the rim. They were throwing alley-oops all over. It was just not fair. And the thing is, we talk about peaking at the right moment. Generally, that means right before a tournament. But I think it means right now. Kansas got lucky that they were able to eke out wins early on in the tournament, but now I think they're hitting their stride. They're hitting it right as the last 2 games of the season really matter. And they're playing their toughest basketball right now, which is good for them because they're hitting their stride. So I think going against Villanova is less of a concern now because we saw what they are at their peak and that they can perform in this tournament at their peak.
Yeah, the second half margin in that Miami game, 47-15.
Yeah, I mean, it was unreal.
I mean, not on the level of South Carolina, Howard, and blah, 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 but
like second half Kansas was the best team in this tournament. Like, that's the best basketball we've seen so far.
Okay, now they have 4 players averaging double figures, and Remy Martin, as my Providence Friars saw, can come in and drop 15 at any time off the bench. And I think there's a case to be made for Ochai Agbaji as the best player remaining in the NCAA tournament, right? He's a constant double-double threat, and he made Providence look silly, to be frank. And then Bill Self. Yeah. This is just his second Final Four since they won the chip in 2008, and not that first Final Four. We all know what happened there. So it'd be nice to see Kansas's head coach, who is honestly kind of underrated because he gets overshadowed by the Coach K's and the Boeheims of the world. It'd be nice to see him get a second title.
Yeah, it should be known that Kansas is the winningest program in college basketball history, and that does have a lot to do with Bill Self. The last 20 years, they've been fantastic. They just haven't been able to get over the hump very often. I think Duke would have a comment about Ochai Agbaji being the best player.
I think so too.
But he's fantastic, regardless.
That's why I said there's a case to be made.
Yeah,
that's why I didn't definitively say it.
Totally. I just think Kansas is maybe the most solid team left. Their floor is higher than any other team left in the Final Four, I think. They just do so many things well and so few things poorly that it's hard to find fault with them. And where you can look at the other teams, UNC, Villanova, and Duke, and find some flaw, something that could be their downfall, it's really hard to find that with Kansas, but also not excited by them in the same time. That saying against Miami, I just spoke its praises, it's fantastic, but that's not the usual. And I hope we can continue to get that, and Kansas can steamroll Villanova, because I'm not a Villanova fan, clearly. But I could also see this game going back and forth and Kansas eking out a win, something similar to that.
I think you kind of shared where I'm at with Kansas when you said they're not the most exciting team. For me, when I watched them put up that second half obliteration of Miami, I found it more relieving than intimidating.
Agreed.
It was more like, yay, they're finally hitting their stride. It wasn't like, oh my God, I'm scared of Kansas and the players on their team. But as someone, like, I consider myself a pretty solid college basketball fan. As someone who believes March Madness is by far the best basketball product in the world, I want every team to play their best game during every single game in the tournament. And I love high-scoring games. I just want them to be able to continue to do this and hope this game against Miami wasn't just a one-off fluke. But I'm still not exactly scared of this Kansas team. I'm just relieved that they're kind of, like you said, peaking at the right time, finally hitting their stride, and finally showcasing that they can compete with the best teams in the country.
Not only is March Madness the best basketball product in the world, it's the best sports product in the world. I'm just going to throw it out there. And but I'll tell you one guy who has known this Kansas team can do it all along, our guy Spencer Pierce.
Yeah, he's on it. A depressive Kansas fan, but he's excited right now.
All right. The Duke Blue Devils, obviously, they've been probably the biggest story of the tournament, given that it is Coach Mike Krzyzewski's, final dance in the NCAA tournament. And, I'm not going to lie to you. When the Blue Devils got steamrolled by North Carolina in Coach K's final game at Cameron Indoor, then laid a dud against Syracuse in the ACC tournament, by the way, then lose the tournament championship to the Virginia Tech Hokies, and then Jim Boeheim goes on First Take and says they're going to struggle in the spotlight, but I think it's safe to say that was a little premature.
Little premature. First things first, I just want to applaud the Duke players for being able to carry the team to a Final Four appearance in Coach K's final season. All year long, all they've probably been hearing is Coach K's retirement. What does this mean to you? And I feel like sometimes the focus kind of takes away from the players and their hard work. So I applaud them for, taking care of business, playing a lot of good teams. Texas Tech was a team I was really a big believer in, and that was an impressive win. I'm curious to briefly hear both your guys' thoughts on this. How do you think the Duke players have been reacting to the Coach K farewell tour this season?
I think it's one of the best motivating factors for them, because I think there's a stigma around Duke players and one-and-done players that they're there just to get there and get out. We saw this with Zion, we saw this with RJ Barrett, we've seen this with a bunch of different one-and-done guys where their motivation is just to get to the NBA. But having Coach K's final tour has given them a secondary motivation to actually try and to win one for the coach. It's maybe a little derivative to say that, because I think college players generally try to win wherever or whenever they're playing. But to have that extra motivation for guys like Powell and guys like Mark Williams and these other guys, it really does affect you. When you hear that media pressure, you can either run away from it and you can say, I don't want this and I just want to, play college basketball and get to the NBA and, make millions of dollars. That's totally legit and fair to say. But you could also take it in stride and take it personally and really try to win one for someone and create a legacy, create a story that will be remembered forever, be memorable in college basketball history. Because if Duke does this, this is a movie waiting to happen. This is a documentarian's dream, and you will be cemented in that legacy. Paolo Banchero and Mark Williams will be the chapters 2 and 3 to Coach K's 1 of this story. So I think their ability to internalize this story and this hype and this pressure and put out the product they have is so impressive.
I think that it's the Duke freshmen, mind you, getting put in this situation at such a young age, it's hard, and I think that's part of the reason why they struggled against Ohio State. They struggled in Coach K's final game. But having those experiences before March Madness can really help a team, because you know what they say, it's not about how you start, it's about how you finish. And the Duke Blue Devils have 5 guys averaging double figures: Banchero, Williams, Griffin, Trevor Keels, Wendell Moore. All 5 are going to be considered for the first round. In fact, all 5 will probably be taken in the first round. Paolo Banchero is a top 3 pick. And one of the stigmas entering the tournament, and I know we've got one more team up to cover, people were down in the doldrums about the ACC, right? But with how Miami performed, with how Notre Dame performed, Duke and North Carolina too, more on the Tar Heels in a minute, I think it's safe to say that the ACC is nowhere near dead like we all thought they were.
No, it was. I've heard this. You heard this narrative a lot, especially going to the ACC tournament and the NCAA tournament, that the ACC was underperforming this year. And the reason we thought that was because they were eating each other alive. And there were some red flag losses earlier in the season that top level teams, UNC, Virginia, all these teams had that were, eye-opening. They weren't, the premier of the premier yet. But by the end of the year, by any metric you looked at these ACC teams, they were fantastic. They didn't have that little number next to the AP ranking, which for some reason is the be-all, end-all for all of us who talk college basketball. But they were fantastic. Teams like Miami, Virginia Tech, Notre Dame, UNC were fantastic teams that were just getting eaten alive, playing each other every single week. So I think the ACC being dead was just such a false narrative from the start, and it clearly showed in the tournament. A little more random luck than usual, I would say, happens in the tournament, so you can't totally base it on that. But the ACC is far from being done. I'd still say it's the best conference in college basketball. And people say the Big Ten. I think it's just not the Big Ten. I would go with the ACC 10 times out of 10.
The Big Ten's tourney results.
Exactly. And it's 2 years in a row doing that.
I would also have to agree with you there. The Big Ten just doesn't show up in March. So whenever you hear best conference, someone says Big Ten, that's just an automatic throwaway for me. But just going back to what you guys said, people hate on the ACC way too much. And maybe that's a byproduct of us living in Syracuse. But the bottom line is that the ACC is just never as bad as you think it is. No. Throughout the season, the ACC was getting slandered. And what do you know? 2 out of the 4 Final Four teams are ACC teams. Kind of reminds me of the Pac-12 last year. As a guy who likes to defend the Pac-12, Pac-12 took a lot of criticism during the regular season last year, and the March Madness tournament, they balled out. So I still agree with Will. ACC, probably the best conference in college basketball. It's never as bad as you think in the ACC.
No, definitely not. Speaking of the ACC, one team left to cover, the North Carolina Tar Heels. They take down Baylor. Unfortunately, they break all of our hearts taking down St. Peter's, but that's the end-all be-all. But it sets up the first Duke-UNC matchup in NCAA tournament history. The road team won each in the season series. UNC had 4 20-point scorers in that win at Cameron Indoor Stadium.
I just start off crazy that this is the first time Duke and UNC have played.
Yeah.
Like, I don't believe it. Even though I've seen it and I've read it and I've looked at the history, I still don't believe it. It seems like something that's made up, and it's so perfect that it's Coach Shea's last year, Hugh Davis's first year. Everything about it seems fake, and I can't imagine it's actually true.
I was having a conversation with my sociology professor about this. It's so good that it almost feels scripted in a way. Me and Professor Marcus Bell were chatting it up about how I'm all here for the Duke deep tournament run because it's good for college basketball, good for the ratings, good for generating attention on the sport. But it's just starting to feel a little scripted. It kind of reminds me, the NFL screenwriters, they went off during the playoffs this year. And now we're kind of getting the same thing. We have a lot of hype behind this game. So my hope that players just give everything they have. Remember the name they're playing for on the front of their jersey. Remember the name on the back of their jersey who they play for. I'm hoping maybe we can get some double overtime, some triple overtime.
Be crazy.
But I'm really looking forward to this. I guess they've just always been on kind of opposite sides of the bracket or never met later in the tournament. Very excited. Can't wait to watch this. Probably have a large group of people and just enjoy every second of it.
Yeah, real quick before we move on, I think this sort of eradicates any sort of dark cloud that was over Hubert Davis's head. I mean, this is his first season coaching, and it had its ups and downs, but I think he is on the road to becoming a nice successor to Roy Williams, who succeeded Dean Smith. Hubert Davis has a chance to become the next great Tar Heel coach. Real quick before predictions, do you guys think this is the bloodiest Final Four we've ever seen?
It's a great question. I really had to look back into the archives here.
So did I. The same. I think we all came up with the same thing, too.
I'm going with 1993.
Yeah.
Looks like we're all in agreement there.
Yeah, we're all in agreement there.
I mean, when you just look at those 4 teams, cut me off if you guys have anything important to say. The champs, North Carolina, Michigan, and them boys down there, Kentucky and Kansas, 4 teams we consider blue bloods. I mean, you can look at every Final Four. Well, you got to.
I don't consider Michigan a blue blood. I think this is so. I don't consider Villanova a blue blood. I think they're a new blood. I think there's 6 blue blood teams: Kentucky, Kansas, UNC, Duke, UCLA, and Indiana. Those are the only 6 Blue Bloods. Indiana. Bobby Knight era is one of the most dominant stretches of college basketball in the world that's ever happened. You got to go look back and see
They're
that.
red, though.
Thank you, Fairfax. So I think there's 3 times that 3 of those Blue Bloods have played. It's 2008, 1993, and 1991. This is the 4th time it's happened, which is great, but I would also agree 1993 I think is the best because Michigan is the closest there.
I think 1993 is the only one that even comes in comparison to this one, but I still think this one takes the cake because I consider Villanova to be more of a blue blood than Michigan.
I don't know.
Michigan has history is the thing. Nova has history.
That's what I want to talk about. Like, does your definition of a blue blood, does history matter?
It has to. I feel
yeah.
Because what if Villanova...
Nova also won a national championship in the 80s.
Well, I'm going to say...
Yeah, but they were an 8th seed that was barely getting into the tournament at that point. It's a miracle run, and it doesn't cement them as a legendary team of the 80s.
When does Villanova become a blue blood is my question.
They became one at 16. All right, we got to move on. Who wins this weekend? We'll start with the Final Four, then get into the national championship. Matt, let's go rapid fire here.
Rapid fire, I'm going to keep it nice and simple. Kansas over Villanova in the first game. Villanova can't score. In the second game, Duke over UNC. I think it's going to be an absolute war of a game. I just think Duke has a little too much to play for. Them boys, we don't know how they're going to be under the spotlight, but I've been impressed with what I've seen so far. And I feel like the NCAA isn't willing to let Coach K bow out in the Final Four. They need him in that championship game. For my final, Coach K playing for a chip in his final game. Does he get it done? Well, this is the NCAA that we're talking about here. So, of course, they get it done. The Duke Blue Devils beating the Jayhawks in the national championship, which means the ACC is doubling down and winning both the men's and women's championships this year. Louisville on the women's side, Duke in the men's side. This year in 2022, the ACC stands for Accumulating Couple Championships, getting both the men and women.
That was a great acronym.
That was great. Echoing what he said, I also think Kansas steamrolls Villanova. Villanova can't score. Kansas is peaking at the right time, like we said. UNC Duke is going to be the best college basketball game of this year. Regardless of what the game is like, it's going to be the best atmosphere we've seen. Maybe in a college basketball game ever since the Michigan State-Indiana State game. It's going to be the highest rated game of all time. No questions about it. Wow. Duke's going to win the game, I believe. I think Duke has so much to play for, like you said. The heart and the soul of this team is Coach K, and he's going to lead them through. Duke wins in the championship. I think storybook ending, I think it's just too good not to happen. And as someone who's not a Duke fan, but as someone who loves a great story, give me a Cinderella ending. I don't care anymore. Give me the best of the best at this point.
All right, so real quick, I've got Nova beating Kansas. History is going to repeat itself from 4 years ago. Kansas hasn't played anyone except for Providence in the tournament up to this point.
They haven't played anybody.
Okay. Duke is going to beat North Carolina. I think that loss at Cameron Indoor really left a mark on the Blue Devils, and it's going to show when they eradicate the Tar Heels. Then Duke beats Nova. Wow, we all have Duke. We all have Coach K finishing his career off in the sunset. And unfortunately, that is all the time we have on this week's edition of the No Pulp Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. You can catch all of our other content on our YouTube channel at CitrusTV. For Matt Fairfax and Will Shea, I'm Liam Griffin. Have a good one, Syracuse.